Can anarchism address issues of national security and defense? It's a question that's been debated for decades. On one hand, anarchists argue that a society without a government is the ultimate form of security, where people can govern themselves and live in peace without the need for weapons, armies, or surveillance. On the other hand, critics argue that anarchism is naive and unrealistic, and that national security and defense require a strong government with the power to protect its citizens from external threats. Anarchism is a political philosophy that advocates for the abolition of all forms of government, hierarchy, and authority. According to anarchists, governments are inherently oppressive, and they only exist to serve the interests of the ruling class at the expense of the rest of society. Anarchists believe that people can govern themselves through direct democracy, mutual aid, and voluntary cooperation, without the need for a state or a police force. The idea of anarchism as a solution to national security and defense issues may seem counterintuitive, but it's not as far-fetched as it may seem. In fact, many anarchists argue that the best way to ensure national security is to abolish the very institutions that are supposed to provide it. According to this view, wars, terrorism, and other forms of violence are often the result of government policies that create or exacerbate social and economic inequalities, perpetuate injustice, and provoke resentment and anger among people who feel oppressed or marginalized. Instead of relying on a centralized government to protect citizens from external threats, anarchists advocate for decentralized, community-based defense systems that are rooted in mutual aid and solidarity. This can take many forms, from neighborhood watch groups to autonomous militias, all of which are organized and run by the people who live in the communities they protect. The goal is to create a society where everyone has a stake in the common defense, and where people work together to prevent and respond to threats in a way that is both effective and just. Of course, there are many critics of this approach, who argue that anarchism is utopian and impractical, and that national security and defense require a centralized government with the power to make and enforce laws, raise armies, and conduct foreign policy. These critics point to the chaos and violence that can result from the absence of a government, and they argue that anarchy would create a power vacuum that would be filled by warlords, gangs, and other forms of organized crime. Ultimately, the question of whether anarchism can address issues of national security and defense is a complex and contested one. There are valid arguments on both sides, and the answer may depend on the specific context and circumstances in which anarchism is being considered. What is clear, however, is that anarchism is not just a utopian dream or a fringe ideology. It is a serious and influential political philosophy that has inspired generations of activists and thinkers around the world, and it continues to shape the way we think about power, authority, and democracy in the 21st century.